Hoodoo plant mamas, get your soul fed and your spirit read.
This here ain't no trend. I possess the power from way back when folk was stripped from all of their kin, so they had to find the magic within. Ancestors and gather my herbs, I conjure at my altar. Voodoo plant mama, I manifest growth and I release trauma.
Child, we just out here trying to water our plants and mind our business, you know? Everybody ain't from the deep south, man. Everybody can't have a culture like us.
Hey y'all, and welcome back to another episode of Hoodoo Plant Mamas. I am one of your co-hosts, Leah Nicole.
And I'm Daddy B.
And today we are joined by Veronica of Ancestors in Training. Veronica, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Veronica Agard. I'm also known as ṣadu sanmi in my lineage. I'm calling from my childhood bedroom in Rockland County, but I am based in Brooklyn, New York. All of that is Lenape territory, specifically Lenape, and I am really excited to be having this conversation. My fellow Southern grandmother may appear. She may crash the party at some point. But yeah, I'm really excited to be here.
Well, we're super thankful to have you. I guess we'll get into a check-in. How are you, Leah?
You know, I'm making it. I am doing pretty good. No complaints. I'm going to say that. I can't think of anything else.
What about you, Veronica?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm happy to be home because both sides of my family are mainly to varying degrees immunocompromised. So it's made visiting trickier than it was to be an only child of parents who divorced late. So you add that on top of all the things in the world, it really reminds me to be even more mindful than I already have to be because I have roommates. So when I know that I'm going to see my mom or I'm going to see my dad, I have to be super mindful about where I go and who I'm around. But lately, it's been that's been the baseline. But then there's another layer of that as of late has been very much rooted in spiritual hygiene and energetics and where I go. Like, folks can't see this right now, but my head is wrapped in a very light color. Like, I'm very much like something's in the water. I don't know what it is, but until I figure that out, I'm just being whites and brights. But I'm doing well. What about you, Danny?
I am making it too. I'm glad the sun is out. I am going to challenge myself to get some more fresh air because I feel like I'm always in the house because I work from home. And I also have like social anxiety. And when I go long periods without going outside, like then I talk myself out of it. I'm like, I don't know if I want to do this. I don't know if I want to end up going to a coffee shop and then it's suddenly crowded and all of that. But I'm going to try to challenge myself to like go and I'll sit outside. I usually prefer to sit outside anyway. So yeah, that's how I'm feeling. Well, let's get into some gratitude. Veronica, what are you thankful for today?
I am grateful to be able to wake up and have affirming conversations with my grandmother. I feel like, especially because I talk a lot about talking to our elders and having conversations with them while they're still here. Anytime I can, as often as I'm holding space or talking with people, it's nice to sit at the feet of my grandmother while she's still here. And, very much, I told her, I was like, oh, I'm recording a podcast today. She's like, Veronica, that Ancestors in Training, I'm glad that you're doing that, like, very warm and fuzzy conversation over a very strong cup of Folgers coffee that she is known for, and I'm grateful for her. I'm also grateful for her in the sense of some of the things that she has done for us to be even to have this conversation. So if it comes up organically, I will, but I feel like I've written about that in the past. But yeah, I'm super grateful for her today.
What about you, Leah?
So last week I reread Legendborn by Tracy Dion. It is probably one of my favorite books, and rereading it was just such a rewarding and fulfilling experience. So I am grateful for that book. I'm grateful for Tracy Dion. I'm excited for book 3 whenever it comes out one day in the future. So that's what I'm grateful for. What about you, Danny?
You know what? I'm really thankful for the way my community showed up for me. I recently got accepted into a residency in Senegal that I'll go to at the top of next year. And I almost talked myself out of it. And then I made this GoFundMe and I was able to raise the deposit I needed. And I do have confidence now that I will raise enough to pay for everything. So I'm just thankful for everybody that shared, everybody that gave. So it looks like I'm definitely going to go and I'm excited about that. All right. Well, I guess we can get started.
So, Veronica, Danny, and I attended your Writing with the Ancestors workshop hosted by Black Joy Reckon back in January. And so that's how we became familiar with your work. And we wanted to talk to you about this idea of ancestors in training. And so you quoted, I hope I'm saying her name right, Yeye Louisa Tish, who wrote Jambalaya. But she also said, we are the ancestors of the future, and what we do now will have an impact. So, can you talk more about how this inspired you to start Ancestors in Training and just your overall journey from then to now?
That quote is that quote. I was like, if a quote could be like that girl, like that is that girl. I have been doing wellness or healing type works since 2012 because I needed to find my own medicine after my late grandmother and my late uncle passed away back to back within like 66 days, something wild, right? I started to read and get into and learn more about astrology and crystals, like the entry point, if you will, for like the woo woo world, for lack of a better term, and that's very much a New Yorkerism. But I started in that space, but mainly was able to find additional healing mechanisms and tools through some of the wellness work that I was doing at the time, which was centering women and femmes. It was called Sister Circle Collective. We used to just gather and be in circle and hold space for each other. But then, as the space holders, we were able to gain some valuable lessons on the needs of us taking care of ourselves while we were taking care of others, right? So, once that collective came to a close in 2017, we all had our own thing by that point, but I hadn't explicitly called out what my thing was. I already knew what it was. It was mainly writing and healing through writing and always being the writer, always being the poet. But I had never called it out loud in terms of this is how I want to show up for other people as an individual. So I was studying basically. I was reading more books, and at that point I had, and I talk about this often, I had experiences with capoeira, and that was my entry point to the orishas and to the pantheon of the traditions. The relationship that capoeira has is with candomblé. Candomblé is the one of the Brazilian expressions of the root of what other folks practice, which is Ifa, Yoruba, Isheshe, right? So basically, they're all cousins, even Hoodoo, all cousins, big bunch of cousins. So I, in that same key, was like, okay, I need to read other books, and that's how I found Jambalaya and found the same Orisha names, found the same prescriptions. She gives so much in that book for free, well, relatively free because you got to pay for the book, but she's very generous. That's what I'm trying to say. And so I found that, and it was more so of all of it was almost like a set of dominoes kind of clicked of like, oh, okay, people always say that I need to write. That's come up in the years since. That's come up in divination several times from my Baba. Like, okay, yeah, you've been needed to write. You've got books for days. Like you need to write. But then the way that I have gotten out of my own way, so to speak, is to hold space around how to alchemize some of the things that I wish that I had have asked my late grandmother or had the language for, right? But also not beating myself up for it, because I was 21. I was still learning, I was still growing, and especially in terms of knowledges around traumas and being trauma informed. Like, I didn't know what I didn't know. But now that I do know what I know, and how can I encourage people to tend to their legacies while they're still of sound mind and body, right? Because my grandmother passed away due to Alzheimer's and dementia. So the questions that I wanted to ask her, I couldn't, because depending on where she was when she time traveled, right? I didn't know what reply I was going to get. But now, whenever people circle, and especially the writing with the ancestors one, literally, like the questions that I offered and the shared, that comes from a space of alchemizing some of that grief of like, I really wish that I could have asked her and some of the other ancestors that I've gained since. But healing through writing means that we can spell some things out. We can speak some things into existence. And I did a research and did a look across the digital land to be like, okay, is anybody speaking about how to live with the future in mind the way that I have in my mind? Right? Like, is there anybody out there doing what I aspire to do? And there wasn't. But I also believe in citation is important, which is why I always talk about Yaya Louisa Tish, because if I hadn't have found that when I did, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about this, or I wouldn't have been able to show up and support folks like y'all, really, or like even be connected to Black Joy by Brecken. And I think the beauty of that is I was able to collaborate with some of my friends and just hit up my friend Shire Share, who also gets cited whenever people ask me this question. They had a conference called Diaspora Radicalix, and a bunch of us got together and we're like, this is how we're showing up in the world as radical diasporic folks. And that was the debut of Ancestors in Training. So that was December 10th, 2017. And it was like 30 minutes of me doing exactly this. Like, so this is what I've been thinking, and this is what it looks like to me. And, you know, weaving some of these traditions around spelling is a spell and speaking things into power. How can we speak things into power now about what kind of answers do we want to be in the future? So I've been holding workshops ever since.
I love that you brought up writing being your spiritual work, because that is something that we've talked about a lot on this podcast as our spiritual. I think that was the first episode we did of this season, writing as conjure work. But anyway, on your website, you wrote, I believe that the responsibility of a generation who lived to see epigenetics and science confirm that intergenerational trauma can rewrite our DNA is to rewrite the future of our descendants. And so I've heard you talk about the work that we do today will impact the next 7 generations. And so engaging in these indigenous spiritual practices is really, walking by faith and not by sight. And so I'm just interested. This was a question you posed, so I'm going to pose it to everyone here. Like, when our descendants look back on this moment, how do we all want to be remembered?
I appreciate that quote back, because sometimes, especially in spirit-led antics, I be forgetting what I write until I hear it back. So I appreciate that very much. It's like, damn, that was profound, really. But I want my descendants to remember that I wrote not only for my life, wrote for my life as in wrote the things down, spelled the spells, like called the things in, but also that I wrote to make sure that I felt seen and that I wrote myself in. I also want my descendants to remember that joy is their birthright. That's something that a friend of mine, Chiquita Brujita, speaks about a lot and does in a lot of her own works, especially within, being third generation Santeria, initiated. Like, there's certain things that she has within her lineage, and also just ways that she shows up in the world to make sure that she's holding space for other people's joy, right? And obviously that's part of the reason why we're friends, right? Because we're a similar mindset. But I also want my descendants to realize how much power they have in the words that they choose. I aspire for them to, and I related to something that you said, Danny, around like you almost talked yourself out of it. Like I aspire for them to not talk themselves out of things, because I almost talk myself out of things all the time. Um, the common terminology for that now is imposter syndrome. And I think that, especially in terms of epigenetics, that kind of like a hesitation of like, maybe, maybe not. Like, it's not something that I want my descendants to carry forward, right? Because I think that sometimes it's a trauma response to think that we're not going to get it, or to not aspire for it because, whatever, it's going to collapse, or that relationship isn't going to work out, or maybe that person isn't into you the way that you want them to be into you. Like, I don't wish that kind of shoulda, coulda, woulda on my descendants. I want them to be discerning. I want them to be steadfast. I want them to trust in themselves. And if they don't, I want them to know who to go to. I want them to have mentors. I want them, if they need to call me and phone a friend, like, do whatever needs to be done. But I really want them to know that joy is their birthright. They should not should themselves out of their destinies, their birthrights, and that they have the power of the pen.
I love that. I've said this before, I think, in different ways. I don't know why this thinking about this gets me all like that warm feeling like you want to cry, but like when they think of me, I want the words freedom, pleasure, joy to like be in that sentence. What about you, Leah?
I was thinking about the Beyonce song, I Was Here. I was here, I lived, I laughed, I loved. And I just want my descendants to know that like any struggle, any sacrifice I do is because I don't want them to. I want them to live a life of ease, of peace, of love, of laughter, of joy. I want them to know that life is magical. They are divine. Anything that they want to do, they can do. This time we have on the earth is a gift. Like, I just don't want them to think that they are a mistake, that they are not meant to be here, that they are not worthy of the life that they have, you know?
Love it. So, one thing I like about, I hate to call things a brand, so I'll say practice of ancestors in training. I think you challenge people to think about death in a new way. And so when it comes to death, many of us are socialized to see it as like this bad thing, as this ending. Once the person you love is gone, they're gone. And I can imagine someone being asked to, like, for us, me and Leah, I love to think about like what I'm leaving behind for my descendants. Other people, it might be uncomfortable if they haven't unpacked that maybe not healthy relationship to death. And I'm interested to know if that was your experience, and if so, how you were able to evolve from that place and to like think about these things in like a nuanced way. And if that wasn't your experience, what advice do you have for people that are struggling with that? I know that was so wordy, but
When I hear that, I think of, there's a song by eBay. They are Afro French Cuban twins, and they are practitioners as well. They have a song called Deathless, and the chorus basically says, whatever happens, we are deathless. And the theme of the song, at least how it lands on me, is that, you know, even if our physical body is gone, like, we're not gone, right? Part of the conversation I was having with my grandmother earlier this morning, and for the record, she is a daughter of the Southern diaspora and the Northern migration in the 1960s to the Northeast, specifically fleeing Jim Crow, Alabama, and to make sure that my aunts and my mom were able to live the life that she knew was a part of their birthright. What she was saying, even though for her generation, because she'll be 87, yeah, she'll be 87 this year. What she was saying is that as a kid in Anniston, Alabama in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, to have conversations like these, or to have conversations about reincarnation or about spirit, energy never dies, right? Like these kind of things, was not a thing for her generation. Or if it was, she just wasn't in the right place at the right time. So I feel really affirmed to be able to talk to her about those things and to affirm that, little her that saw ghosts, like, is valid, right? Yeah, she casually dropped that one day, and I was just like, wait, hold on. So me that has been, into the spiritual things or has been doing this kind of work, like I wasn't alone, but it was not that I was alone. It was that I didn't have the language yet to be able to hold space for her to say, oh yeah, so this reminds me of this when I was a kid and and I was like, okay. So it's not just me per se in air quotes, but I find that at this stage of ancestors and training, have held space for elders like my grandmother. I've been able to talk to youth as young as 10 about it. I've taught it as a course to young people, high school age young folks, several times. And I find that those generations, so that the youth and the elders, I don't really find as much interference or like hesitancy or like pauses or almost like a bodily reaction where they constrict when I talk about what it means to be an ancestor, right? Because it's really inviting people to understand that we're not going to be here forever, right? Which, depending on your age, when you hear that, it's like, what do you mean? Like, I still, or like, especially in modes of capitalism and the stage of capitalism that we're in, some people can hear that and be like, wait, I still have all these things that I need to do. I haven't accomplished this, that, and this. And it just turns into this really like constricting kind of bodily reaction. And it actually is like, no, like for whatever reasons, whatever your lineage is, like there's so many things that have happened before us that can elicit that response. What I'm inviting you to do is to find out your why, to find out where in your lineage that cycle started. And is there anything that you can do to break that now? So that way, as we've been talking about those that come after us, whether they are chosen, right, like nibblings, nieces, nephews, all of that, or like our biological children, if we choose to have children, or if we choose not to, people in community that we help raise, they will remember that we broke that cycle. And I think that for the most part, I've had a lot of success, like in general, but I feel like the illumination of the other ends of the life spectrum, right? The beginning of the life spectrum and the end of the life spectrum, having, no kind of pause or no hesitancy to talk about it. I'm like, okay, word. Like it's topical. It's a conversation that needs to be had, but it also takes me breaking it down, right? Because sometimes people hear ancestral veneration and they're like, what does that even mean? Like, do I have to get an altar now? Like, what is this? Do I have to, like, depending on the lineage, do I have to be in white for a whole year? Like, what does that even mean? And it's actually like, no, like we all have ancestors. We all need community. We all need to find ways to be good humans while we're here. And once I say it like that, people kind of soften a little bit, but it's taken me learning how to invite people in different ways that are more accessible. And when I say accessible here, I really mean like not just in the woo-woo esoteric, but like on the real, like, yo, so you know how we say like, oh, I felt that person's spirit or that person's energy, or here in New York, the vibe was off, so I left. That might have been your ancestor being like, go home. Like, you don't need to be here. That happened to me recently. And right after I left, some wild stuff happened. So I'm grateful for my team, but also what I try to invite people to do is really to find their own way to arrive to this work. Because I can only say what has worked for me, which y'all that have circled with me, I'm usually like, this works for me. If it doesn't work for you, like, take it, leave it, edit, be like, yo, sis, like, that could have gone better. Or like, that was great, do it again. Whatever kind of feedback you want to give me, but also just understanding that the challenges there or the hesitancies there to talk about death, I want to say, unfortunately, changed because of the pandemic. Because of the pandemic, a lot of us had to sit at home with a lot of different things. If we had been tending to the work, if we had been doing the shadow work, as the kids are calling it, it might not have been as much of a reach. But if we had never done that before, we had never sat with ourselves before, then that was scary in and of itself. So for those people, by the time I arrive to them, by the time the Instagram algorithm is like, hey, you might like this account, they've already had that kind of experience with themselves, hopefully, for them to be like, oh, okay, word, like I have all this grief about the ways of the world and the people that I've lost. And there's this project that is holding a container just for that. Right. And that's an entry point to the philosophy because it's a mindset. I'm inviting people to understand in my combination of words that I offer out that we're not going to be here forever. So what are you going to do? Are you going to wait until you're on your deathbed, which we aspire and wish for everybody for that to be a long time from now? Or are you going to utilize the time that you have, utilize the technologies that we have, going back to what I said about the different technologies that we have access to, right? Like we live in a time where science confirmed that smoke cleansing a room actually gets rid of the toxins in the air. We can, try and figure out our relationship with death a little bit. We can try and understand that things are, things in this world can be yes and. Like, yes, death is scary. Yes, I don't wish that on anybody. Yes, I don't want that to happen for a long time. But also, that's going to happen. So how can I live in a way that is with the future in mind and not in a selfish way either? In a way that's just like, this is what needs to be done.
So we just had an episode about Black excellence and just like the negative ways that constant chasing of being excellent and perfect has impacted us. And as a kid, I just wasn't thinking about that. I didn't start thinking about it until adults started putting that pressure on me of what you become, the work that you do is somehow puts value on who you are as a person. And I think that's part of that, what you said about capitalism, where people are just thinking, I got so much stuff to do, but it's like, you could be doing some beautiful things in the moment and you're still just constantly chasing something, and that wastes a lot more time than you thinking in terms of like this scarcity about death and I can't die because I got all this other stuff left to do instead of what you're doing now.
I want to say I do agree. And thinking about you saying not just kids, but also older people, I've been thinking a lot about like how kids have this innate sort of knowing. I know me and Danny has talked about like being young and just knowing things that we didn't know how we knew them, but we knew them. And then it's the same thing with older people. And I think after living a life of experiencing so much death, they have to become intimate with it. And then they're knowing, like, I'm getting older, I'm going to die. And so I think that that is why they are a bit more accepting of death compared to the rest of us. And so recently I was reminded of this thing that Toni Morrison talked about, how education was about discrediting this innate sense of knowing. And so in order for her to write, she had to get back in touch with this inner knowing that she had, this intuition, this ancestral knowing. And also what you said about like science just now catching up to things that our ancestors have always known, even if it did not have like fancy terminology for it.
I resonate with that a lot, especially just in terms of what you offered about elders having a different relationship with death because they see it, right? Thinking about my grandmother who's still living, she's one of six. She's the last one that's still alive. She's not the youngest either, right? So she's had a different kind of relationship with that for a long time. And then also just understanding and just having conversations, like it not just my grandmother but my mom says this to me often. She's like, when it's my time, like we're gonna have this conversation now before, God forbid I lose my faculties, or it's gonna be written down somewhere, but I want to tell you to your face so that way when this time comes you can remember that I said I don't want a funeral that's somber. I want it to be a celebration of my life. And my mom has done all the steps to, turn herself into food for a tree. So she's like, when you miss me, just go sit at the tree. That's the whole point of me doing that, which is sweet because, that's my mother, the Pisces, my favorite fish. But also just having those kind of conversations around, those kind of rituals of grief can make it so that way it's a little bit easier when that time comes. It doesn't mean that it will be easy, right? Like, I pray that that's going to be a very long time from now, but I at least know, like, okay, my mom said this, and this. Or even going back to the science really quick, that's also kind of like the science behind in certain traditions, especially like you got to avoid dark colors, right? Because dark colors absorb energy. And science, I remember a science class literally where they were talking about the prism and the different colors and all the things, and how black absorbs heat. That's why when you wear black clothing in the summertime, you get hot really quick. And, for me, like now in my tradition in Ifa, I'm like, there's certain colors I have to avoid for the rest of my life. And also there's certain colors, especially, that I can't put on my head, right? Because my head is my connection to my higher self and is a version of my higher self. So anytime I'm overwhelmed, I'll just do a slick back, put my curls down, and just go whoop, whoop, like, and my friends now know that if they see me in almost all white or shades of white, that either A, something is afoot, B, they should leave me be, or C, that they should check in on me because I felt something, right? And as opposed to being like, like, I'm not going to go outside, which I can get, and that's easy to do in the pandemic, of just like, I'll just be inside playing The Sims, like, and then clocking into work after the break. Like, The Sims ended up being my anti-anxiety tool for the pandemic. I brought it back on my computer, and I make all the little happy Sims, and they live wonderful little legacies. Of course, obviously, because it's me. I'm talking about ancestors and training. Of course, my Sims are happy, but I really do appreciate being alive in this time of, like, both remembering what it was like before the internet was free, mainly, and like having to pay for dial-up, and you still have to pay, but I was like, as a child that remembers dial-up, like, also realizing what a time to be alive where we can connect with people across time zones, like what we're doing, or across different continents and in the future, right? Because sometimes folks come to my stuff and they'll be in Australia, and I'm like, huh? Like, you're in tomorrow. Like, not that you can't be here, but you're in tomorrow. Like, are you sure? Like it's mad early or it's super late. Like, I don't know what's happening, but yeah, I just wanted to say that it's really both, and like, it's nice to be alive in these kind of times where, one, we're having more conversations with our elders, but also two, that science is catching up to what spirit and what varying traditions said before they got the cosign or the validation from other external forces.
Well, I guess we'll go ahead and take a break, and we'll be right back. Thank y'all for tuning in to our show. If you want to support us, you can rate and review us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can follow us on Twitter at Hoodoo Plants and Instagram at Hoodoo Plant Mamas.
You can check out our Patreon, where we share exclusive video, plant, and spiritual content for only $3 a month. If you prefer a one-time donation, you can donate via Cash App, hashtag Hoodoo Plant Mamas, or our PayPal, hoodooplantmamas@gmail.com. Let's get back to the show. So going back to the workshop, I took a few notes because there were so many gems that people dropped, especially Danny. I was in the chat like, okay.
Had me in my bag, like, okay, come on in the room then, Danny.
And so something, I forgot who said this, but it was related to Coco, the Disney movie. And it was like, you die twice when you leave this world and when people forget about you. This was something that I wrote during the workshop, was like, we have to do whatever we can to make sure we're not forgotten. And I was thinking about the cruelty of not being able to read and write, because when we can't tell our own stories, we can't control our own narrative, and we're essentially erased from history. And then our stories are being told by us, by people who don't care about us, by people who are violent towards us. And so that is a lot of our current reality. That's what we're seeing with the book bans right now, and how people are trying to strip books out of the hands of children. In Texas, they're trying to shut down libraries because they're like, it's a mess. It's a mess. And so every day we kind of deal with this violence. And I've been wondering, what can we do? And so a question that you posed at that time was, how can we walk with integrity in the face of an uncertain future?
So I'm laughing. That's another one of my quote backs. I'm like, I said that. So how can we walk with integrity in the face of an uncertain future, especially for descendants of enslaved Africans, as you said, that we did not know how to read or write, but we were still able to carry forth stories, still able to carry our traditions even when we were brought over here without our consent, right? Like varying forms of varying traditions, but also like how to. I'm specifically thinking of granny midwives, right, in the South, and how they knew what herbs to go get and ask them to do a proper measurement or to break down the root of whatever herb they got. Might not be able to do that, but can they tell you that they knew that it was this herb because it grew next to this tree or grew on this side of the water? They can, right? So it's about different kinds of knowledges that I think are really valuable, especially in indigenous teachings across the world, not just indigenous to the Americas, but indigenous everywhere, right? There's an element of storytelling and that being important, and that people have to, in order for the story to be told and in order for somebody to not be forgotten, that means that people have to actively listen. And I think that that's super important, especially in a world of book bans and defunding libraries, which is what um, current current mayor of New York City is trying to do, right? And defunding all the things that have to do with people, what I would argue, liberating themselves. My mom said that to me as a kid growing up all the time. Like anytime I would come home and, class would say one thing or teacher would say one thing, I'd come home and be like confirm or deny, basically. And my mom and my grandma would be like, yes, but also like go get thee to this bookshelf, like go over here. And that's a privilege in and of itself. So I think for me, I'm really, and this started in my undergrad career, like very much into archival memory and both and like doing the traditional academic things of learning how to, tell a compelling story, how to write, in that voice if you need to, but also getting the consent to record, my grandmother from time to time, like when she gets in that storytelling mode, and wants to drop gems like Danny did, I'll be like, wait, hold, I'll literally go, wait, stop. And like, just go get my phone or just record. I think that that's one way to do it. And then to make sure that we have, wherever we keep those archival memories, that is safe. Like I know after a certain point, I take a lot of the things that I produced or the things that I have, and I put them on my external hard drive. And I do that from time to time just to make sure that I have a backup just in case, But that's because I have the tools and I know how to do that. Not everybody knows how. Not everybody is in a space where they feel safe enough to do that. So my other, how can we walk with integrity is to find people to walk alongside with, that people that remind you that you're not alone in this, right? Which can be hard, right? Because even I'm saying this living in one of the most populated places in the world, like being in New York City, like you can still feel alone in New York City, like absolutely can. And there's nothing like being in a room full of people and feeling alone. That is one of the wildest feelings you can ever experience. But the beauty of the internet is that you can, kind of curate a community and not curate in a way that excludes people, because I think that does happen, but you can curate in a way that invites people into into a level of being or a way of understanding, which is what I view the ancestors and Instagram as. But given the ways in which the metaverse and the world and all the things, I'm like, yeah, that should not be the only space that community lives. So how can I create other pockets for other ways and other lanes? Like, can I tend to the newsletter? Can I do more in real life things that are as safe as possible? Can they be outside, like having different conversations? So that way I can invite other people to walk alongside, right? Because we're not alone in doing any of this work, right? Like we started this conversation talking about some of my inspirations. And then even on a basic quote, quote, ancestral level, like we're never alone really, if you think about it. So that kind of both and there, like we're never really alone, but also it might be lonely because if you have friends that aren't necessarily into the same traditions, they don't practice the same way, not even on a political way, just they just don't believe in it, or they just haven't arrived to that level of understanding. Consent says, okay, cool, like I can't force your hand, I can't make you believe in the same things that I do. I just hope that however you want to live is the way that you want to live, and that it's in service to your highest good. But I think that for me, a part of that answer to that question is archival memory and documenting things, writing them down, getting consent from elders and other family members. And then, as we talked about youth, maybe even youth, right, which is its own other separate process to get permission from their parents and guardians and families. But then also finding other people to walk alongside this mystery, right? Because a part of the answer in that is trusting in the unknown, or actually invoking and believing in what Octavia Butler invited us to think about when we say God is change, right? Like sometimes, or at least in the circles that I run in, like I see that quote all the time, see it all the time. And I even cite Octavia as a, collective ancestor of Ancestors in Training as a project, right? Because she inspired me, and I like to give people their flowers, even if they're not physically with us anymore. But even within that, there's still this fear of change. Like even in this space that we're in since the advent of COVID-19, I'm like, yeah, people are still afraid of change, right? Because even though the world as we knew it stopped, and there's no way that we can go back, there's only forward, right? And then a person who has certain energies that guard her, that are the guardians of change, right? I'm like, wait, like, woohoo, like we're just gonna, even if we don't know what we know. And I'm just like, whoop, we'll figure it out. Whimsical. Other people, not knowing, not having, a sense of like, okay, where's this, roller coaster gonna end? Panic at the disco if they can't discern where it's gonna lead to. They say if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plan, or tell him that you have a plan. I'm like, once I heard that, I'm like, oh, okay, fine. I'm not trying to make God laugh about that. He can laugh at me about something else. Like, but not that. Like, how can we invite people to that level? And I always say invite specifically because it's an invitation that not everybody's going to pick up, and that's okay.
Man, I was about to say something, and then you said that about God laughing when you make plans, because, and then when you get to that point and you hear younger people who are like early 20s, mid 20s start talking about those plans, and I be want to tell them, like, you ain't even got to your Saturn return yet. And I'm telling you, it's going to flip you upside down and stump you out. Like, and in some ways, you'll be thankful for it. Not in the moment though. So in the interview you did with Star for Black Joy, there was a quote that you said, with the age of the internet, we're seeing a lot of things that, in my opinion, we're not meant to see unless we were there at the event. I think there are some things that should stay off the internet, especially ceremonies and people's altars. If somebody really knows how to try and cause me harm, I gave them the information to do that. I think that's such a good point, and something me and Leah have discussed several times. It's like there's this really thin line, and I think a lot of spiritualists, especially ones with like public facing platforms, are really trying to they're trying to be ethical in like wanting to educate the community, because not everybody has access to these things. Or I've seen people say, y'all are always talking about talk to elders, but they're all dead, I don't know my elders, or I was adopted. But there's also like this having boundaries and gatekeeping, because a lot of African traditional practices and spiritual traditions, they've been like co-opted. So many books on hoodoo are not written by Black people, and I can't for the life of me make sense of it, how it got in their hands and why they felt like they had the authority to write a book about it. So in thinking about like Black folks kind of trying to return to these traditions and center ancestral reverence and healing, I know in your interview with Star, you also mentioned pulling from different African diaspora religions. So how did you figure out what works for you and is most aligned with your needs, with the needs of your ancestral lineage. And I want to give context to that, in that there is some controversy about mixing these traditions. Even though a lot of people do, and like you said, that they're cousins. And I think sometimes that rigidness of feeling like you have to stick with one thing, which is something I have struggled with, is it may not be what your ancestral lineage is calling you to do. So yeah. So how did you figure that out for yourself?
Yeah, so I can clarify what I mean by that in a couple of ways. So when I say that this project draws from a lot of different lineages and teachings, what I'm saying is on the ancestors and training syllabus, there are people who practice Ifa, there's people who are hoodoo practitioners, there's people that practice Santeria, there's people who've been initiated in a whole bunch of things, and they've written a lot of books, right? So that's what I mean by draw from, because I'm like, here are a bunch of people that I think are speaking to this concept that I also think that you should know, right? With myself, my personal journey and my own lineage and my own tradition, I am an Abarisha within the Ifa tradition. And my lineage, specifically, at least in Veronica, my lineage is Caribbean and Southern, right? So it was very important for me to make sure that whatever my ancestral tradition, especially in this noise that can happen on the internet, is in alignment with my actual ancestry, right? And one of the things that I say, especially in terms of like that quote, because I've seen that too around, I don't have any elders, I don't have anybody to go to. I was fortunate where some of the projects and some of the works that I was doing at the time in 2018, largely Who Heals the Healer, mutual friends in common with my now godfather suggested that my now godfather attend some of my works. So my ancestors were very like, okay, you're on your path, you're on your path. Okay, here's somebody that can help. You go further, right? And he's also Guyanese, he's also a Sagittarius. So I was like, gang, like we should be friends. Like this is great. I got my first reading from him in 2018, which is 5 years ago somehow. And it came out back then like, hey, you should probably consider again consent, because especially in this age of scammers and digital babalals, I want to say for the record, the right teacher will come when the student is ready, but also the right teacher will invite you to study with them. They will not try to coerce you. They will not try to harm you in the name of you being initiated into any tradition, right? And if they try to gaslight you, they try to make you feel that way, or they give you some kind of unwarranted or unwanted attention, that's not your space. That is not where you're supposed to be. That does not mean that you have to find a new one right away, but just know that if it's like it's giving you an ick, get out of there in any way that you can. I did not have an ick at all, like I've been saying. Like I high key was keyking with my now godfather when I first met him. And because I have a lot of respect for the varying traditions and understand the differences between Santeria Lucchini, where in order to be initiated to a certain degree, you have to wear white for a year. And it comes with a whole bunch of prescriptions of things that you can and cannot do. Some of which I have ideas of, some of which I don't know because that's not my lineage, right? The same way that somebody on that side of the tradition won't know some of the things that I had to do to be an Abarisha. There's might be some things that are common, right? But that's what I meant by cousins, right? There are some things that are very much similar, but even our Ides, even our bracelets, right? Depending on the lineage, they'll be green in there, but the other color might be yellow. Mine are green and brown. For people that are in the know, they know that there's a difference between a green and yellow one and a green and brown one, but they stem from the same place, right? But in my whimsical and sometimes I get in my own way self, even though I knew that the invitation to deepen my practice via going from outside the house, outside the Eli, like physically outside the door spiritually, to being inside the house, which is where I am now, I took my time. I took my time. I read more. I traveled a bit. I went to St. Kitts. I hung out with some of my family. I went to Jamaica. I fell in and out of love. Did a whole bunch of like I had a time. Okay. And then was still developing, still communicating, still being in relationship with my now Elay when they had community events, and still getting yearly readings from my now godfather. And every time I would get the reading at the top of the year, be like, we're waiting for you. Like, come on over when you're ready, but come on over. Which he reminded me of when I finally created completed the rites of passage that I did, right? But I think that that type of dynamic, that type of relationship, you will find the right mentor from this practice when not only when you're ready, but I also think when it's needed in your life. Because for me, it gives me a sense of grounding in a literal way of like, okay, Veronica, you got to make sure that you take care of yourself. Like, you keep talking about ancestors in training, you keep talking about your elders, but you have relatives that you haven't met yet. Like, go on down to St. Kitts, go spend time with them, build some of those bonds, make those connections, right? Become some of the family archivists. And then come back and write about it and see what that looks like. But that's me. Again, my nature is to be like, okay, I'll figure it out. Like, wait, not everybody can do that. And not everybody can have humor while they do that. I don't know. I might call my mom in here and be like, why am I like this? I really don't know. But I do know that I talk about discernment a lot in this age of digital everything, and like going back to what we said about, certain things shouldn't be on the internet. I don't know. There's some things that should be in the room for the people that were in the room only. And that also comes from what I believe as a facilitator and a circle keeper and a space holder. I'm like, there's certain things that somebody said in that room, in that Zoom room, or even in real life that I don't need to put on the Ancestors and Chinning account. But the people that were physically there in that room, they needed to hear it. And hopefully they took it with them. They keep it with them. They keep it somewhere close, so they write notes, right? Or even like what happened with writing with the ancestors. Like, that stayed in the room. There were some gems. People got some things after the fact, but majority of that was in the room, right? And I really do believe there's a magic of what happens in that room, because there will never be that exact combination of people in that room again, right? So I try to tend to that magic the best that I can and say like, hey, like, this is why sometimes I record things, and then sometimes Spirit is like, nope, not this one, the next one. But I just can't emphasize that enough, that I really took my time to make sure that the expression of what I believe matched not only what I was able to and willing to commit to, but also felt right in my spirit. Because, there's just so much that happens in the internet, and like gatekeeping, and then sometimes reverse gatekeeping, and then sometimes people get lost in their genuine curiosities and wanting to have elders or wanting to have mentorship, and then that's how they get got by these scammers. And that's the worst part of it for me. I'm like, for all of that, people really just wanted to be seen. People really just wanted to be listened to attended to, and to hear messages from their ancestors, or hear messages from their spirit guides, or whatever type of messages that they wanted to hear. They just wanted to be heard. And it really makes me sad that there's people that take advantage of that.
I'm so glad that you emphasize the like not only taking your time but reading, studying. I think the internet and what it I grew up in church, and I grew up talking about superstitions and hearing my aunt say certain things. So I grew up with a basic understanding of things, but the internet and having access to podcasts and these kind of things did open up a door for me. But and I'm still on my journey, when I really started like getting into it, I realized that like it wasn't enough, and there was some work that I had to do that wasn't going to involve the internet. And I think it's scary. And I have been someone that have like, where's my elder? Like, where is someone? Like, I feel like I need someone to help me with this. But like you said, there have been people that have came, but I felt like they were pressuring me in a way that was like uncomfortable to like immediately initiate. And I was like, Lord, can you slow down? I'm still trying to figure out my altar stuff, And so, yeah, I think it can be a struggle. So I'm really glad you said that, because it honestly takes years. Like, it takes years to get to like a certain level in your spiritual journey. I don't know anybody that it happened to overnight. And even when you get into the practice, if you get initiated, there's always there's always something. Like, there's always something that you're doing, or some hump that you have to get over that you didn't know at the time. So
Yeah, you're always a student. Like, even
yes.
my godfather says that all the time. He just did a podcast interview where he said just that. Like, as long as he's been practicing, he still has a mentor. Like, he has his aluo. Like, he has, a bunch of godchildren like me that are, we are who we are and we're wonderful. But there's a responsibility there. And especially, and I feel this as a former youth worker, as someone who both can mentor but also needs to be mentored, as in, like, I need somebody to guide me, and I can also be like, yo, don't step that way, or like, you can step that way, you could do this, but also there might be consequences. Are you sure you want to do that? But I really just wanted to emphasize that, like, no matter what title you get, all the names you get, or how many orishas you may have, and how many responsibilities, right, that come with those kind of honors, right? And that's a differential too. Sometimes people, it doesn't matter what lineage, I'm just talking people broadly, take spirituality out of it. Sometimes people almost do like gotta catch 'em all Pokemon type stuff with titles and lineages and PhDs and programs, and they get all these letters and all these things and all these titles, but they still haven't done the inner work. They haven't taken care of the Iwapele. They haven't figured out how to move kindly through the world or sweetly through the world or any combination of the two. And then, you know, they do all those things in the name of whatever they thought they were going to get from it, as opposed to how to be in reciprocity with it, how to be in right relationship with it. And, that's why I wanted to just be like flag on the play. Like, like, we really do have to continue to study. Like, and I continue to study. That's why I say to people sometimes, I'm like, that's just an apparitia is a Yoruba way to say, like, I'm a spiritual baby within my elate. Like, I'm very new. That's why, depending on the lineage, you're supposed to cut all your hair off when you initiate again, because you're brand new. Start over.
Well, this is my last question. Going back to that article that you did with Black Joy, you said, what happens in any space that we offer, we are especially zooming in on what it means to be an ancestor in training that's trying to create new traditions. We're not just talking about the trauma and the harm that's been caused, but thinking a step ahead and thinking about the joy and the possibilities that can come from when we shift our thinking a little bit. We're not just talking about what cycles to break, but what cycles to start. And in that same article, you talked about how being a plant mom reminded you to drink enough water, and we're both plant moms here. So I'm wondering, what are some other ways we can break cycles and pass on joy and possibility to our descendants?
I feel like I've already said to talk to your family or to invite folks into these different types of knowledges. And it's not to say that you need to, quote, quote, indoctrinate people into what you believe. It's just kind of invite them to walk alongside you and see what happens. In my case, that means like telling my parents and my grandmother and my aunts, like, okay, like, here's this podcast that happened with ancestors in training, or I'm going to go do this talk over here. Sometimes it comes, like, sometimes in the near future, if you catch me on a Zoom thing, my grandmother and my mom and my aunts may make a cameo, which is always fun. But I also think, in terms of cycles, to break, it really starts with us. Like, if anything that we offer, anything that we share to other people, like, sometimes it's nothing like talking with somebody or listening to a friend and you give them advice and you're really speaking to yourself too. Like, I as that friend, that happens to me often. I'm like, shit, like, I need to do that too. You're right. Like, okay, like, ancestors, I see what you did here. And not being afraid when those moments come. One of the things with this advent of the internet and all the things is that sometimes we think it has to be this elaborate knockdown, like, have to wear all these things and you have to do this and you have to spend all this money because capitalism. And it's really, it does not have to be that deep. I'm not trying to yuck anybody's yum. If that is your jam, go for it. If you have the means to do all that, amazing. But if you don't, just remember that it can be as simple, going back to my godfather, it can be as simple as like, before your feet touch the ground. I'm also saying this at myself because I have been better about hydrating, but I have not done as good a job as I do with what I'm about to say, which is to pray over water before you drink it. Like say like, okay, whatever it is that you need help with or support with over the day, and then just be like, and drink it. Or in my plant case, depending on what's going on, like if I want to love on them, I'll just be like, or like love on myself vis-a-vis, and I'll just tip it out. um and like having that kind of ritual in terms of like watering myself, watering the plants, like refreshing the water in my ancestral altar, right? Like I do good with the second half of what I just said, like my plants and my altar, but then I forget me. So I'm claiming that as like I can do better on that, but also just remembering that we always have the opportunity to remember that we're not separate from nature. Like I feel like unfortunately because of like wellness TM, whatever that means, there's this hyper commodification that happens that we have to grab up all the things and that we have to do all the spells, and like it requires a spell kit from Amazon that has nothing to do with the people who were the original stewards of the tradition and have been ostracized historically, specifically indigenous to the Americas teachings and all of that. And it can really just be as simple as what my mother does every morning, where she, first thing she does before she wakes up is that she'll look out the window and she'll look at the birds, right? Like she'll just look at them, listen to them, see what's happening in, the neighborhood of nature that is my childhood home. And she'll do that before she looks at her phone, before she interacts with anything else. And then maybe after that, she'll go feed the cats. And then maybe she'll have some coffee. And then maybe after that, she'll look at her phone, right? Like that's a very simple practice that she can do. And because she does that, it reminds me that I really don't always have to doom scroll first thing in the morning. But then also being kind to ourselves, right? We're still alive in these kind of times. We still have the habits that we have. But also, again, there's a power in claiming things or naming like the cycles that we want to break and cycles that we want to start around. At least for me, something that has come up since I've been visiting family this weekend that this podcast is being recorded is around health, and like having conversations with my family around some of the things that they're experiencing and some of the things that they are working through and some of the habits that they're trying to break. So that way that can be a cycle that they start and then I just pick it up of like, oh, okay, like I know my mom cut back on drinking soda and she dropped some weight, so I should probably do that too. Or increasing my water intake, but then also walking around more, which is ironic because I live in a city that is very walkable, but I don't walk around as much as I should. And I don't take up the nature that is around me if it's not, in my room, which it's in my room. I got 6 plants. I got it. But I'm also just like, there's more to experience. There's more to be had. There's more to live because abundance is also our birthright, and there's no such thing as scarcity in nature. So
I love that. Leah, did you have any final thoughts?
I just want to say thank you to Veronica. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. This has been such a wholesome talk. Yeah, that's all I have.
Well, I would like to thank you as well, and I like to thank you for your work. Because I feel like I think like after that writing workshop that you did or the circle that we did, I feel like since then I've just been thinking about it, even if it's not every day, like it's at the back of my mind, and it makes me feel, it helps me to value my life a little bit more. It's like this is not for nothing, even when it feels like it. And I know the way so many of my ancestors, even when they weren't thinking about it, the ones that I actually met, what they have left with me, what I have taken from them growing up, and just remembering things about them or things coming full circle, is like it was a gift that I would like to leave behind. I don't see myself having birth children or bearing children myself, but if I adopt, or my nieces, nephews, or whatever, that's who I think about. Like I just, yeah, yeah. I won't go on a tangent, but I'm just thankful for this because it gave me the space to think about it and think about my life in a different kind of way, which is what I probably needed. So yeah.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate all the warm and fuzzies.
All right. Well, that's going to be the show. If you like this episode, you can like, rate, and review Hoodoo Plant Mamas on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If anything from the show resonated with you, make sure to share it with us on social media. You can find us again on Twitter at Hoodoo Plants and Instagram at Hoodoo Plant Mamas. We will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.